Now, a lot of people say the answers to the problems that we've been talking about this whole conference is to have really good standards. And in fact, NIST put together one of these, the NIST Privacy Framework. However, our next speaker is going to tell us about some things that it doesn't quite solve. So Christopher Landis is from the Naval Postgraduate School, and in this work with Joshua Kroll, he's going to be presenting Mitigating Inference Risks with the NIST Privacy Framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Like you said, I'm Chris Landis. I'm a PhD student at the Naval Postgraduate School. Dr. Joshua Kroll is here as my advisor. And just as a few background points, NIST spells out as the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a U.S. federal agency. And about inferences, if we look back in the literature, we can find as early as at least the 1980s, some papers on protecting against inferences in statistical databases. So that's something to keep in mind. We've been, as a community, even before pets existed, we've been looking at inferences. And then one final point is that frameworks tend to lend themselves readily to the concept of a checklist because of a tendency for us to want to fill them in and to complete them so that we can achieve whatever the objective of that framework is. So with that, I'll begin with an example of a more recent inference incident that occurred. Many of you are familiar with the Netflix prize data set. Netflix anonymized about a tenth of its data from movie ratings and released it, and they said, hey, you can't re-identify this in mass. It's too difficult to do that because of the way we anonymized it. But some researchers, of course, did just that, as they have a reliable means of re-identifying individuals who had wrote those movie ratings. So the enablers to this re-identification was that there's a concept that because Netflix had removed the PII categories or sensitive data that like PII or even quasi-identifiers, that should be enough to help protect privacy. But then also attackers, or in this case the researchers, were able to combine the outside information with the de-identified data, and with those two together, we're able to re-identify. So this caused some concerns with complying with privacy law, and Netflix canceled its second contest. But Netflix is not the only organization to have had some troubles with this. There are quite a few that have been made public. Here's a subset of at least those. And there's probably more incidents that have occurred and just haven't made to the public eye yet. So as we look at this problem, we understand that privacy risk management is challenging, and incidents can harm both people and the organizations too. And organizations have a legal, reputational, or altruistic reasons for wanting to do privacy well. So with these motivations, many organizations will turn to some type of guide or framework. In the U.S., the NIST Privacy Framework is an eminent guide, and it claims to be a comprehensive approach to organization-wide program management, privacy program management. And we ask, is it? And more specifically, how about for inferences, like singling out that we saw in the Netflix example? And then our objective here is to identify the gaps for inferences and then to form some recommendations based on the observed lessons that we have. So as we look at those incidents, the inference incidents that I had listed on a couple slides ago, we find really two types. So we split them into a taxonomy. We find re-identification inferences are all about singling out individuals in de-identified data. And the other type are operational inferences, which are all about attributes about people, and attributes about organizations. And I picked four of those incidents here that together show the essential incident structure of each type, so that we can have some degree of generalizability to the other inference incidents. Of note, all 4 of these incidents occurred prior to NIST publishing its privacy framework. So those organizations could not have been influenced by the framework. And a bit of background about the framework. At least pertaining to this research, there are some multiple components to the framework. We're interested here in the core of the framework, which consists of those functions you see in the colored boxes, and those subdivide into categories and further into subcategories. And then the subcategories map to these cybersecurity and privacy controls in a separate document, NIST Special Publication 853, Revision 5. And the goal here is for organizations to make a judgment about their risk for each subcategory, and then to select controls that are appropriate for the organization's situation. So NIST had mapped the controls based on the input from the community contributions to the framework as those controls that organizations might find most helpful for each subcategory. And you can perhaps see here then the framework both informs and relies on a threat model that's specific to the organization. So there's one subcategory related to inferences, listed there, the CTDP-P3, and it maps to 9 controls. So we conduct a qualitative analysis here where we have those 4 incidents, and we gauge them against each of the 9 controls that are mapped to the inferences subcategory, and we determine that, if the control, the sense of the control that is implemented, then why did it fall short, and if it was not implemented or unlikely to be implemented, could it have helped? And this provides a proxy to us for determining whether the framework attends its users to the appropriate aspects to consider for identifying and mitigating inference risks. So these 36 analyses reveal really 3 themes. One, that attackers can combine outside and public information with the anonymous data. 2, that trying to protect individuals' privacy by removing personal identifiers, including PII, is sort of like a checklist, but that doesn't always relate to achieving privacy. And then thirdly, there's difficulty in translating policy into technical implementation. And you may find, if you remember from earlier, these are similar themes to what we have from the NIST, from the Netflix case that I presented on the second slide. So we form 4 specifically recommendations, and this one is the second recommendation of those 4 that we have in the paper, and it's to increase the awareness and best practices of how to protect against inferences. So the framework is meant to attend focus to the risks that matter, and then prompting the people within the organization to think about the inference, the risks to those inferences. And in the paper, we provide a brand new control that we had recommended about literacy training and awareness on inferences. And then here on the example on the slide, there's some rewording that we recommend for one of the controls, and there's some others as well that we list in the paper about where you can see this control about accounting for disclosures only considers the PII, but that didn't hold up in the Netflix case or in the other cases that we have. So we said we should also account for incidents of re-identified individuals and purportedly anonymized organizational data. So there are some threat models that already incorporate inferences quite well. One of them being the Linden threat model. There was a workshop on Monday. I went. I think a few of you I see familiar faces from that were also in attendance there. But specifically of the 7 threat factors on there, linking, identifying, detecting, and data disclosure are all inferences are well embedded into the concepts of those threat vectors. So in the case of an organization having having sensitive data and wanting to share it for some utility, what are the options? And we've got some methodological options, and we have some technological options. One, we just not release the data, but then we have the trade-off of utility that we don't get from having that data. So then there's a newer concept called functional anonymization, and Elliot and others wrote about this as a supplement to the UK Anonymization Risk Code of Practice. And if you're interested more in that, I'd recommend you take a look at their paper. And then there's the PETS. Differential privacy is quite limited in the scope of the use cases that we can use it, and we find from the literature published on the U.S. Census Bureau's implementation of it that it's quite challenging to implement it well and in a way that it's working as intended. And then for private computation, you can think of, for example, homomorphic encryption. That's still very much in development and is difficult from a practical standpoint. There's some more ideas discussed in this morning's keynote as well. So in conclusion here is when privacy is hard and we're faced with inferences, organizations will tend to use guides to help them achieve their goals. So as we find the NIST privacy framework can be largely helpful to organizations, I'd ask this community, what does the future of human-centered design look like for privacy frameworks like the NIST privacy framework, or privacy threat models and implementation checklists, and how those things can help us with privacy? Thank you.
I definitely want to talk to you afterwards. You mentioned the inference enablers earlier in your talk. Is there a taxonomy of influence enablers, or a generally recognized list of things, or any work that helps you understand sort of being able to look at your data to say these are things that we should be concerned about? Because I know you're talking about the NIST privacy frameworks, but that doesn't seem to get at what you're talking about with the influence enablers.
Right. I know of no published taxonomy to say these are the ways that we can conduct inferences, unless you narrow the scope a lot, like the statistical database disclosures that I mentioned at the very outset, where we have a very narrow scope. There are some papers, and I can share those references with you later, that lists very specific options for that method. But in the broader scope of the inferences that I presented in this paper, there's no taxonomy for that. Hopefully this paper can help in that direction. The threat modeling that I mentioned, I specifically highlighted Linden, that although it doesn't list a taxonomy, it incorporates them, these concepts in there.
Okay, and given that we are at time roughly, I think this is a good time to thank Chris. Thank you, everyone.